A single twig snapped in the darkness, and John Parker froze mid-step. 23 years of hiking experience had taught him that the forest always speaks truth to those willing to listen. And right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The Douglas forest had never been this quiet, not in all his years of walking these ancient trails. The October morning hung heavy with fog, turning familiar trees into looming shadows. At 52, John had seen every mood of this forest, from the gentle warmth of summer dawns to the fierce rage of winter storms. But this silence was different, unnatural. No chirping birds announced the sunrise. No squirrels chattered in the canopy above. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. John adjusted the straps of his worn leather backpack, his calloused fingers finding comfort in its familiar texture. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense pine branches, casting strange patterns on the frost-covered ground. He checked his compass out of habit, though he knew these trails like the lines on his weathered face. Crystal Lake lay 2 hours ahead, his usual Friday morning destination. The mist parted slightly as he rounded the bend near Eagles Point. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the morning quiet. Metal scraping against metal, followed by something between a whimper and a growl. John's heart jumped into his throat. In all his years of hiking, he had learned one golden rule: never investigate strange sounds off the marked trail. But this sound carried something that tugged at his soul: pain, fear, a desperate plea that transcended language. John stood motionless, listening as the sound came again, weaker this time. His mind raced through the possibilities, each worse than the last. A wounded animal, a trapped creature, something suffering. The logical part of his brain urged him to continue his hike, to call the forest rangers once he had cell service near the lake. But 20 yards off the trail, another sound pierced the silence. This time, there was no mistaking it. A bear's growl, but not one of aggression. This was the sound of defeat, of exhaustion, of pain so deep it stripped away all wildness. John's fingers tightened around his hiking staff as he took one step off the trail, then another. The fallen leaves whispered beneath his boots as he moved carefully through the underbrush. The fog seemed to part before him, revealing glimpses of the forest beyond. Each step took him further from safety, from the known world of marked trails and comfortable certainties. Then he saw it, and his blood turned to ice. In a small clearing ahead, a massive brown bear lay on its side. Its fur was matted with morning dew, muscles rippling with each labored breath. But what made John's heart stop was the cruel metal trap that had clamped around the bear's front paw. The ancient killing tool was a relic of a less enlightened time, its rusty jaws biting deep into flesh and bone. The bear's eyes met his, and in that moment, John saw something that would change his life forever. There was no fury in those eyes, no wild rage. Instead, he saw something impossibly human, a plea for help, a spark of intelligence that transcended the barrier between man and beast. And in that frozen moment of connection, John Parker knew his next decision would either end in tragedy or become the most amazing story he would ever live to tell. John's mind raced as he assessed the dangerous situation before him. The brown bear was enormous, easily 7 feet long, with powerful muscles visible even through its thick autumn coat. Despite its trapped state, one swipe of those massive paws could end a man's life in seconds. Years of hiking experience had taught John to stay at least 100 yards away from any bear. Now he stood just 30 feet from one. The morning fog continued to swirl around the small clearing as John studied the trap that held the bear captive. Its rusted metal teeth had snapped shut on the bear's right front paw, the cruel device anchored firmly to the ground by a heavy chain. Blood matted the fur around the wound, though the bleeding seemed to have slowed. The bear had clearly spent hours trying to free itself, as evidenced by the torn earth and broken branches scattered around it. Each time the bear shifted its weight, pain flashed across its face in an almost human expression. Its breathing came in short, ragged gasps, and its normally bright eyes had grown dull with exhaustion. The trap looked old, probably left over from decades ago when such devices were still legal. John felt anger rising in his chest at the thoughtlessness of leaving such a dangerous tool in the forest. Common sense screamed at John to back away slowly and call for help. He reached for his phone, already knowing it would be useless. This deep in the Douglas forest, cell service was non-existent. The nearest ranger station was 4 hours away by foot. By the time help arrived, the bear might have done itself serious harm trying to escape, or worse. The bear's eyes tracked his every movement, but something in them spoke more of desperation than aggression. John had encountered bears before during his countless hikes, but never like this. The usual wild fury was gone, replaced by something that tugged at his heart, a quiet understanding of its own vulnerability. John took one careful step forward. The bear's muscles tensed, a low growl rumbling in its throat. He froze, speaking in soft, steady tones, trying to convey calm through his voice alone. The growl faded slightly, but the bear's eyes never left him. Another step and another growl, louder this time. John retreated slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. After watching the bear for several minutes, John removed his backpack and took out his water bottle. He poured some water into his cupped hand and took a drink, then slowly set the bottle on the ground. The bear watched with obvious interest as John backed away. Its tongue flicked out, licking dry lips. The pain and struggle had clearly left it dehydrated. John's first attempt to leave water for the bear ended in failure. As soon as he tried to approach with the water bottle, the bear's fear overcame its thirst. It lunged forward despite the trap, sending John scrambling backward, water spilling across the leaves. The sudden movement made the bear cry out in pain as the trap cut deeper into its flesh. Time passed with agonizing slowness as John made several more attempts to approach. Each time, the bear's instinctive fear proved too strong. Yet with each failed attempt, something subtle changed. The bear's growls grew shorter, its reactions less panicked. It was learning, John realized, that he wasn't there to cause harm. As the morning sun climbed higher, John wrestled with his choices. Every rule of wilderness safety told him to walk away. He had a wife at home, grandchildren who adored him, a whole life that could end in one moment of misplaced compassion. But as he looked into those intelligent eyes once more, he knew he couldn't leave. Something profound was happening in this small clearing, something that went beyond normal interactions between man and wild creature. If he walked away now, he would carry the weight of that decision for the rest of his life. The sun climbed higher in the autumn sky as John settled into his patient vigil. He sat cross-legged 15 feet from the bear, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Every few minutes, he would softly hum an old hiking tune, letting the bear grow accustomed to his voice. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the full beauty of the forest clearing where this unlikely encounter was unfolding. Hours passed like molasses. John knew from his wildlife books that bears were incredibly intelligent creatures, capable of complex problem-solving and emotional understanding. He watched as the bear studied him with equal intensity, its eyes showing a depth of awareness that both thrilled and humbled him. Its initial panic had given way to something else: curiosity. Around noon, John unwrapped his trail lunch. The smell of his peanut butter sandwich drew the bear's immediate attention. With careful movements, John broke off a small piece and placed it on a leaf, then used his hiking stick to slowly push it toward the bear. This time, instead of growling, the bear stretched its neck forward, sniffing the offering. After a moment's hesitation, it delicately took the morsel. The simple act felt like a breakthrough. The next hour brought small but significant changes. The bear's breathing grew calmer, its posture less defensive. When John spoke quietly about nonsense things like the weather and his grandchildren, the bear's ears would perk up, tracking his voice. It was learning that his presence meant no threat, perhaps even understanding his desire to help. A remarkable moment came when John accidentally dropped his water bottle. Instead of flinching at the sudden movement, the bear merely watched with what seemed like concern, as if aware of John's frustration. There was an intelligence in its gaze that went beyond mere animal instinct. When John successfully retrieved the bottle and showed it was okay, the bear actually relaxed its shoulders, almost like a human would. The true turning point arrived in the early afternoon. John had been slowly inching closer, gaining ground in tiny increments. He now sat just 10 feet from the magnificent creature. The bear's eyes had grown heavy with exhaustion, its head occasionally drooping before jerking back up. In a moment that John would remember forever, the bear deliberately laid its head down and closed its eyes, keeping only one eye slightly open to watch him. This display of trust, this willingness to show vulnerability, brought tears to John's eyes. During this time, John noticed more signs of the bear's remarkable intelligence. It would look pointedly at the trap, then at John, as if trying to communicate. When John pantomimed a pulling motion to show his intention to help, the bear's eyes followed his hands with clear understanding. It even attempted to position its trapped paw to give John better access, though the movement clearly caused pain. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, John realized a profound truth. He wasn't just dealing with a wild animal anymore. He had formed a connection with a thinking, feeling being that understood far more than anyone might expect. The bear had recognized not just his presence, but his purpose. It had chosen to trust him, going against every natural instinct for survival. Through patience and gentle persistence, they had built something extraordinary, a bridge across the ancient divide between human and wild creature. Now, as John prepared himself for the crucial task ahead, he knew that this trust was both a gift and a responsibility. The next few minutes would put that trust to the ultimate test. John studied the rusty bear trap with growing concern, now close enough to see its cruel mechanics clearly. The trap was an old spring-loaded model, its powerful jaws clamped tight around the bear's right paw. Years of exposure to the elements had left the release mechanism stiff with rust. A chain anchored it firmly to a buried stake, preventing the bear from dragging it away. Blood had dried around the metal teeth, and the bear's fur was matted with dirt from hours of struggling. Drawing from his engineering background, John understood the trap's basic mechanism. Two powerful springs on either side controlled the jaws. To open them, he would need to compress these springs and trigger the release plate simultaneously. Under normal circumstances, this would require specialized tools. All John had was his multi-tool, a hiking stick, and his decades of experience fixing farm equipment back home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing as John laid out his plan. He removed his thick leather belt and his spare bootlace. The belt could serve as a wedge to keep the jaws from snapping shut again once released. The bootlace might help him pull the release trigger from a safer distance. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared his makeshift tools, knowing he would have only one chance to get this right. John began by speaking softly to the bear, explaining each movement before he made it. The massive creature watched him with those intelligent eyes, seeming to understand the gravity of the moment. When John moved closer to examine the trap, the bear lifted its injured paw slightly, as if offering better access. The simple gesture nearly brought tears to his eyes. The first attempt to compress the springs failed. The rusted metal groaned in protest, requiring more strength than John could safely apply while keeping his balance. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. The bear remained remarkably still, only its quickened breathing betraying its nervousness. John could feel its warm breath on his hands as he worked, a reminder of just how close he was to this powerful wild creature. After several tense minutes, John revised his strategy. He positioned his hiking stick as a lever, wedging it carefully under the first spring. The wood creaked ominously as he applied pressure, but held. One spring compressed halfway, then 3/4. The bear winced as the movement jostled its injured paw, but made no aggressive motion. Their hard-won trust held firm. Just as John prepared to tackle the second spring, a distant rumble of thunder broke the silence. The bear's muscles tensed, its eyes darting nervously toward the sound. John froze, holding his breath. One panicked movement now could spell disaster for them both. He began humming softly, the same tune he had used earlier, watching as the bear gradually relaxed again. With painstaking care, John managed to compress the second spring. Now came the most dangerous part. He would need to trigger the release mechanism while maintaining pressure on both springs. One wrong move, and the trap could snap shut again, this time possibly catching his own hands. The bear seemed to sense his concern, remaining absolutely still despite what must have been considerable pain. Using the bootlace as a makeshift pull cord, John positioned himself as safely as possible while still keeping the springs compressed. He took a deep breath, offered a silent prayer, and pulled. For one horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack that echoed through the clearing, the trap's jaws sprang open. The bear immediately withdrew its injured paw, but John's work wasn't finished. Moving with careful precision, he slid his leather belt between the jaws before they could snap shut again. Finally, after another minute of tense manipulation, he managed to fully disable the trap's spring mechanism. The ancient killing tool lay harmless on the forest floor, its last victim now free. John backed away slowly, his heart pounding so hard he could barely hear the approaching thunder. The bear cradled its injured paw close to its chest, blood flowing freely now that the pressure was released. Their eyes met once more across the clearing, and John saw something in that gaze that would stay with him forever. A depth of understanding that transcended the natural order of things. The first drops of rain began to fall as John and the bear regarded each other in the aftermath of the rescue. John expected the freed animal to bolt immediately into the safety of the forest. Instead, the bear remained where it was, studying its released paw with what looked remarkably like relief. Blood trickled from the wounds, but the damage appeared less severe than John had feared. The bear's thick fur and naturally tough paw pad had provided some protection from the trap's cruel teeth. Thunder rolled closer as the bear slowly tested its weight on the injured paw. It winced but managed to stand, its massive frame rising to its full height. John held his breath, fully aware that he was now facing a completely unrestrained wild animal. 7 feet of muscled power towered before him, capable of ending his life with a single swipe. Yet fear seemed strangely distant in that moment. What happened next defied everything John knew about wild animal behavior. The bear lowered itself back down, not in aggression or weakness, but in a deliberate, almost gentle motion. It extended its injured paw slightly, much like a dog might offer its paw to a trusted human. The gesture was so unexpected that John found himself frozen in place, rain now falling steadily around them. Minutes passed as they watched each other through the curtain of rain. The bear's eyes held none of the earlier pain or fear. Instead, John saw something that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. Recognition. Not just of him as a presence, but of what he had done. The massive creature shifted its weight and then did something even more remarkable. It slowly pushed John's fallen water bottle toward him with its uninjured paw. The simple act spoke volumes. This wasn't just basic animal behavior. The bear had observed John's careful attention to the water bottle throughout the day. Now it was returning the item, showing an understanding of possession and perhaps even gratitude that went far beyond typical wildlife behavior. John's hands trembled as he reached for the bottle, moving slowly but without fear. As the rain intensified, the bear's attention turned to its wounds. It began cleaning the injured paw with careful licks, but its movements were hampered by the awkward angle. Without fully understanding why, John pulled out his first aid water bottle, the one he kept specifically for cleaning wounds. The bear paused its grooming, watching intently as John mimed cleaning motions. In a moment that seemed to defy the natural order of things, the bear extended its injured paw slightly toward John. The trust implicit in this gesture was staggering. Moving with infinite care, John began to gently spray water over the wounds. The bear remained perfectly still, only the occasional twitch of an ear betraying any discomfort. The rain provided a natural curtain around them, as if nature herself was shielding this impossible moment from the outside world. Their unlikely first aid session lasted several minutes. The bear watched John's every movement with clear intelligence, adjusting its paw position when needed to allow better access to the wounds. There was an almost collaborative feeling to their interaction, as if they had somehow moved beyond the ancient barriers between man and wild creature. As John finally sat back, emotionally overwhelmed by what had just transpired, the bear did something that would remain etched in his memory forever. It slowly, deliberately, pressed its forehead against the trunk of a nearby tree, leaving a distinct mark in the wet bark. The gesture was unmistakably intentional, almost like it was marking this place, this moment, this connection. The rain began to ease as the afternoon light faded. Neither human nor bear seemed eager to end this extraordinary encounter, yet both seemed to understand it was time. The bear rose once more, favoring its injured paw but standing strong. It gave John one final look, its eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that would challenge his view of the natural world forever. In that moment, John knew with absolute certainty that this was not goodbye, but rather the beginning of something remarkable. The week following the rescue passed in a blur of normalcy, but John's thoughts constantly returned to the clearing and the extraordinary encounter. He had taken a different trail that evening, his mind racing with the impossible events he had witnessed. The memory of those intelligent eyes and gentle gestures haunted his dreams. By Friday morning, his usual hiking day, John found himself drawn back to the Douglas forest, both eager and uncertain about what he might find. The morning dawned clear and cold as John approached the area where he had found the bear. Fresh dew sparkled on the fallen leaves, and the forest seemed alive with its usual sounds again. He noticed something odd about the trail ahead. Several branches appeared deliberately placed across the path, creating a subtle barrier. As he paused to examine them, a familiar presence emerged from the shadows of the trees. The bear moved with surprising grace despite its healing paw, stepping into a shaft of morning sunlight. The wounds were clearly improving, the fur beginning to grow back around the scabs. But what struck John most was the bear's deliberate approach. There was no aggression, no wild wariness, just recognition, and what looked remarkably like welcome. Over the following weeks, their encounters developed a pattern that defied conventional wisdom about wild animals. The bear would often appear on John's regular hiking days, sometimes waiting near particular trail markers. Its behavior showed signs of remarkable intelligence and memory. One morning, John found the trail ahead blocked by fallen trees after a storm. Before he could backtrack, the bear appeared and led him along a safe alternate route, pausing occasionally to ensure he followed. A particularly astounding incident occurred during an early winter hike. John had slipped on an icy patch, twisting his ankle. The pain was intense, and he knew he faced a difficult 3-mile trek back to his truck. As he sat assessing his injury, a familiar shape emerged from the trees. The bear approached with what could only be described as concern, watching intently as John struggled to stand. Then, in a display of incredible awareness, it began breaking branches with its weight, creating a crude but effective walking stick. The bear even seemed to adjust its pace to match John's limping progress, staying nearby until he reached the forest edge. Their connection grew stronger with each encounter. The bear would sometimes bring John small gifts, pine cones, interesting pieces of bark, once even a lost hiker's water bottle. These offerings went beyond simple animal behavior, suggesting a level of thoughtfulness that challenged everything John knew about wildlife. The bear appeared to remember specific locations where they had met, often returning to the clearing where their story began. One memorable morning, John encountered a young moose that seemed agitated and territorial. Before the situation could become dangerous, his ursine friend appeared suddenly on the trail. The bear positioned itself between John and the moose, not aggressively, but with quiet authority. The moose, recognizing the bear's superior strength, quickly moved away. The bear then turned to John with what seemed like satisfaction, as if pleased with its role as protector. Their most remarkable interaction came during a heavy rainstorm. John had taken shelter under a rocky overhang, watching the deluge transform the forest floor into streams. To his amazement, the bear appeared carrying a large piece of tree bark in its mouth. It placed the bark carefully at an angle, creating a channel that diverted water away from where John sat. The intelligence and consideration behind this act left him speechless. As months passed, other hikers began reporting unusual bear behavior in the area. They described a large brown bear that seemed unusually gentle, one that would guide lost hikers back to marked trails and warn them away from dangerous areas with carefully placed branches. John kept the full story to himself, but he knew each tale was another chapter in their ongoing saga. The bear's presence had become more than just encounters with wildlife. It had evolved into something profound, a friendship that transcended the natural order. The bear showed an understanding of human vulnerability and a willingness to protect that went far beyond instinct. It remembered past interactions, anticipated needs, and showed what could only be described as emotional intelligence. Through summer heat and winter snow, their bond continued to grow. The bear would sometimes simply sit near John as he ate his lunch, sharing a companionable silence that needed no explanation. These quiet moments held a magic all their own, a testament to the extraordinary connection that had formed between them. Their story had become living proof that the barrier between human and wild creature was perhaps more permeable than anyone had imagined. 1 year after that fateful morning in the clearing, John Parker sat at his desk, looking through the journal entries he had kept of his extraordinary friendship. The simple act of removing a bear trap had transformed not only his life, but the entire community's relationship with the wilderness around them. His grandchildren now called him the Bear Whisperer, a title that made him smile even as it reminded him of the profound responsibility that came with his unique experience. The changes in John's life went far deeper than mere reputation. His weekly hikes had become something more than just exercise or escape from city life. Each venture into the forest now carried the possibility of another remarkable encounter, another chance to witness the depth of understanding that could exist between species. The bear's presence had awakened something in him, a deeper connection to the natural world, a recognition that the line between human consciousness and animal awareness was far more blurry than he had ever imagined. Word of the gentle bear spread throughout the local community. Hikers reported extraordinary encounters, the bear guiding lost children back to marked trails, warning people away from unstable ground with carefully placed branches, even protecting injured wildlife from predators. Each story added to the growing legend, but John knew the fuller truth. These weren't just random acts of kindness from a uniquely gentle bear. They were the conscious choices of an intelligent creature that had learned the value of compassion from a simple act of human kindness. The local forest ranger station noticed a remarkable change in the community's attitude toward wildlife conservation. People who once supported aggressive bear management policies now advocated for more humane approaches. The story of the trapped bear and its subsequent transformation into a guardian of the forest had touched something deep in the public consciousness. Local schools began incorporating lessons about wildlife behavior and the importance of compassion in their curriculum, using the bear's story as a powerful example. John's own perspective on life had shifted fundamentally. The hours spent in quiet communion with a creature he once would have feared had taught him patience, understanding, and the profound power of trust. He saw now how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he never could have imagined. The bear had shown him that intelligence, emotion, and consciousness weren't exclusively human traits, but part of a broader spectrum of life that deserved respect and protection. As spring turned to summer, John continued his weekly visits to the forest. Sometimes the bear would appear, sometimes not, but its presence was always felt in the way the forest had changed. The cruel trap that had brought them together now sat in the local museum, a reminder of how far they had come in their understanding of wildlife. Next to it, a simple photograph showed a large brown bear sitting peacefully near a hiking trail, its eyes showing an intelligence that no one could deny. The most profound impact, John realized, was not in the individual acts of kindness or protection, remarkable as they were. It was in the way their story had challenged fundamental assumptions about the barrier between human and animal consciousness. Their friendship had become living proof that compassion could bridge even the widest of natural divides, creating connections that defied explanation, but felt deeply, undeniably real. On quiet evenings, John would sometimes return to the clearing where it all began. The mark the bear had made on the tree that rainy afternoon remained visible, a permanent reminder of the moment when trust overcame fear. It stood as a testament to a simple truth, that in showing kindness to another living being, we often receive something far greater in return, an opening of the heart that changes everything that follows.